So, hi, my name is Michelle Moloney, and so how I came across Dawn Rowe, first of all, was I was doing some work on I was doing some work on grief and mourning, and I just one day I googled grief and mourning artist photography, and her name came up, and I just thought she was just such an interesting artist. And the work that I saw at that time was part of conditions of the unfinished work of mourning, but it wasn't the Wretched Yew work. This is a different element to that work. I suppose I was just really taken by how the depth of the work and how interesting it is and really quite challenging. And I mean, I've spent 2 days trying to put this together because there's so much to it. And I ended up reading a bit about Gilles Deleuze, who I didn't know anything about, the French philosopher, which was like my head was wrecked from him, to put it mildly. But it's really relevant in terms of thinking about repetition and repetition in photography and the power of it and the idea of creating the new through repetition. So anyway, I suppose what I would say about this work, first of all, is that it is definitely it is an elegy. It's haunting. What really appeals to me in many ways is the unfinishedness of it, that it doesn't kind of sit with the, I suppose, the sort of longing in human narrative, which is about a beginning, middle, and end. I think what's really interesting, and I didn't think I would be talking about this, but it's the methodology, I suppose, really, really interests me. Um, and I suppose particularly the kind of, if you think in terms of epistemology and how we know what we know, this work is very much about the knowing coming from the making. It's experiential and it's about memory from the land, and also the human is not the centre. I think the memory of the land is the centre. So, and in the making and the knowing, there is the question. And I think this is what, for me, a lot of art is about. It's about the question as much as the answer. So, a quote here is: making as knowing. Here we find making as repetition, as communion, as salvation. The immersion into the work feels really significant, so that lines between the maker and the making and the knowing cannot be separated. And when I was making work in the past, a few years ago, around grief, this was my experience, but actually I didn't write it as elegantly. So I was really happy to come across that actual iteration of that sentence. So she uses the yew tree to speak to her sense of mourning, but also there's a real sense of hope in this work, I think. And it's mourning about the injustice in the planet, the injustice to humans. And I suppose in ways it is a critique of neoliberal capitalism, I suppose. So Dawn Rowe herself is a photographer and a digital video maker. She's got an MFA in photography, and she is a professor at Rollins College, which I think is in Florida. So just talking a bit about the actual book. So when I got the book, I was initially deeply disappointed first time I saw the book, because first of all, it cost me $75, and I just thought it just looked like something. My immediate thought was that if I was in a car showroom and they were giving away something free, that this would be kind of the format of the book. It would be kind of a fancy car book or something like that. And so that was my initial thing, and that was really kind of, I thought, oh, I don't like that. And then I didn't like the text. I didn't like the font. I didn't like the positioning of the font. But actually, as I touch the book, it feels really, really nice. And it's sort of, it's almost like a linen type sort of texture, with sort of a coating on it. I think it's heavier than the paper inside. Maybe it's 125 or something like that, the weight of the paper, I'm thinking. Um, and then I saw the second page, which actually had exactly the same um, text, and it had the same font. And I just thought, well, what's the purpose of that? I just thought, oh my God, I just didn't like it at all. But now that I know what I know, it's about repetition, and repetition is at the heart of this work. It was published by the Tracy Morgan Gallery, and there's an essay in it by Lisa Zahir, and she received a PhD in art history. So, and I have number two of 30 copies that's signed, so I'm really happy about that. There's a real simple elegance, I think, to the work. And what it is basically is it's an elegy. And what I really like about it is that her presence as the artist and the maker and the learner is really explicit in the work. Um, so the first image you come across is this one, which is part of a branch coming from a yew tree. It's shot in a studio, I guess. I really like the decontextualization of it, that it's almost like a specimen, even though this is a very, very common tree. And it reminds me of that sort of like, Victorians going off to far flung lands and bringing back the exotic. So there's kind of a little bit of an irony in it, I think. And in the text, what they write about is the yew tree was known as the trash tree, and it was like cleared and burned. So there's an elevation of it really in that image. The next image is of a part of a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson called In Memoriam. What I find is that there is text interspersed through the actual book. And the text, the font is really kind of interesting in that it speaks of another time. And the basic theme of this poem, which is a very long poem in case any of you ever want to read it, it's called In Memoriam, is the need to persevere and continue, which I think again sort of echoes the sort of what's encapsulated in this work. So if you see there, this next image now is a continuation of the image with the text about the yew tree, Tennyson's one. So it's black and white, except there's a little bit of brown, and I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yeah.
And it's also that placement of image on top of image, which I just think is really interesting, and I'll talk a bit more about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the text. There's text interspersed around throughout the book, and there are different types of font actually. The Tennyson one is very ornate, so it's the text speaks to time as well, and some of the text looks very utilitarian, which is kind of maybe taken from manuals and things, and then you also have the creative essay by uh, Dr. Zahir. Um, so the design is very straightforward, and that initially I was a little bit disappointed. There are definitely no bells and whistles kind of on it. But the more time I spent with the book, the more I appreciated the images and the layout, and really liked. Like it's quite subversive in a way, I think, because it appears really simple, but in fact it's a really complex, complicated, multi-layered book. So one of the things she uses a lot, one of the devices she uses a lot is just give you that. What times are these in which a conversation about trees is almost a crime? Is that she uses repetition. Um, and I'm going to I'm going to actually distill Gilles Deleuze's epic work on repetition into one sentence. In in every repetition there is difference. No one is exactly the same. And this is one of the images where there's a sense of her looking out at you. So again, it's all this layering. So we're back to a specimen again about the. I just really like the way the images are the way it's broken up as well, and in some ways that kind of reminds me of sort of some way it speaks to me about, I suppose, academia in a way, and the siloing of knowledge and how things are separated out as if we don't live sort of multidisciplinary lives, really. Um, so, okay. So she uses film. Now, oh yeah, the other thing is this is actually part of the installation. And I think this is really interesting that they show part of the installation as part of the book because um, it kind of when I was looking at the book, I sort of forgot in a way about it being part of an exhibition. And so what this does, I think, is it reminds you of the power of art and art as resistance, I suppose, um, and art, the place of art in and the voice of art, I suppose, by actually bringing it into the gallery and sort of opening up a conversation about, in this case, it's about the environment. So she uses with some other little bits of um, So here we're back again now to more of these kind of all these sort of shots of the of nature and what's outside, and her making the work as well. Says we've forgotten the nature, the ontology of the body, the conditions under which bodies are uncultured, psychologized, given identity, historical locations, and agency. And here we go with repetition and repetition and repetition. And so time. So Rowe gives us time. Time is record and trace. Time is memory. Time as exposure. Time is labour, contemplation, and history. We find it in the trees, within the frames, and between them too, on the film and through her gestures, all testimonies to time. So we're back again with our just parts of the tree, and then she shifts into what appears to be abstraction, but they're not really abstract images. They are the capture of the intertwining of nature, film, and weather. And then a quote from the essay: "Weather brings chaos and chance, and this echoes in the fragility of rose prints, marks, accidental marks by chemistry, light, and air, wounds of the present." So these are just some of those images. So she's using film, and she uses film as a method of capturing the image, and also how to use it as a device to speak of duration. Her still images, mostly made as time exposures, read as durational events. So also the work was made at the time there were those fires in California. Some of the work was made then, so there's references to that as well. Then you have a map, and just looking at my notes here because I've written something about the map. Anyway, I suppose the map is very kind of for me, the map is very present at the moment because I'm actually I've been looking at maps because I'm making work about partition. And so this is like the thin map, the sort of real utilitarian map, the map that gives you the name of places, you know, how far the distance between A and B, but actually gives you no sense of place. And I suppose in ways is, I'm thinking about Tim Robinson's work, if anybody knows that. A book he's written, one of his books about Connemara, and he writes a lot, he's dead now, but he wrote a lot about the landscape and the knowing of the landscape. And so, as I say, my interest is in deep mapping, and this is kind of the antithesis. This is kind of the utilitarian, bureaucratic sort of thing. I'd written something really kind of interesting about that, but I can't find it at the moment. So, okay. So what she does as well is she uses the same image, she repeats the image and sometimes sort of fades it, which I think is really kind of, it's almost like creating an echo through the book as well. So these are some images now that to do with the fire. This one, she uses a cyanotype. Here is a sort of an image, and I love that sort of overlayering of things, where in fact what you have here is images and images on top of images, but repetition of the images all the time. And one of the things she uses here is an image of a cello, and I was sort of thinking, I wonder what that has got to do with things. And there is text about the cello, or about music, but it really, I just thought that even the choice of instrument, I mean, for me, the cello is something that is really evocative of sort of longing and sort of a forlornness. So all the time, there's just like layers and layers and layers of, in the work. And again, even where she puts where there's text, there's just the kind of faint image underneath the text. And here she's back into sort of the map and the environment again. This is an archival image coming up, you know, and actually you probably can't see it, but it's kind of just the way it's written, you know, shifts it. And this is probably the next series of images is probably my favorite in the book. That the color is really beautiful, and I think this is film that has been left out and exposed. I think working your way through the book really plays with your sense of time between the sort of very representational layered images and then the sort of abstract images. Like there's all this, you almost get lulled into a sense of with the repetition that there's a sameness and there's kind of a familiarity, and then you're broken up with these sort of images. And using the film, I think she uses film as well, so she sort of creates all these tensions by this disruption, and then by returning back to the sort of familiar images of the environment, it's kind of like a song, and you're coming back, and there's the chorus, I think. So she uses the film as well as subject, as well as the object for capturing the images. And I do think embedded within the frames, there are all these visual sort of paradoxes suggesting both depth as well as time. So the film is almost like an artifact. Yeah, I think that. This I found really sort of disruptive, this image, because particularly the image of the woman singing. And I found the colours were really jarring, and there was sort of felt like an anger and a rage. It was my immediate sort of impression from the image. And then the next page you turn over, and it's there is the kind of like the faded image again, and I just so the quote actually beside it is about the it's a longish quote, but just the end of it is, as if indeed twinned with her dirge some incorrigible hope. And I just find that so fun and so reassuring. There's a real shift towards the end of the book, and then we sort of return back to sort of the more familiar, and again that kind of the layering of the images. And this I've spoken about earlier, the idea of taking one image and breaking it up so that it's sort of it makes a whole image, but there's all those separations. And here again with the film sort of a subject. There's an awful lot of images in the book. The text, I have to say, is the essay is absolutely beautifully written. Really, really interesting essay. Coming at the end. These are some of my favourite images, actually. I was wondering, if it was edited down, would it be better? But there's something about the length of time it takes you to go through that feels very important as well. And this is the final image. Okay.
Work, so thank you. And then well, I mean, it's difficult when we don't have the physical book, because that's what we're all about, but at least it allows people who aren't local to come along as well, so that's great. And then we'll think about the next one. I think this book will be a good one.
Okay.
It's probably back to the front, is it?
No, that's it. No, it's good.
Yeah. So that's a very good book, so we could talk about that for the next one if you like.
Great.
Well,
Richard, thanks for organising that, Richard.
Richard had suggested that that I do 2 books. I'm so glad. Well, Richard, I didn't do 2 books, and the other book I was going to do, there's about 140 images in it. So I'm really, really glad I didn't do that.
That's for the future. That's for the future.
Okay, there's a good few of you there before me now, lads.
Okay, all right, guys. Thanks very much.
Happy World Book Day, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.
See you later. Good to see everybody. Bye.